For anybody who saw my second video that I put on here, that was my breakdown of the Jagged Little Pill musical, you'll know I'm a huge fan of the stage doorman at the Broadhurst, Ernie. I did a whole video just gushing about how wonderful Ernie is, but I don't need to because there is a movie, a documentary that just premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival this past week called Broadway Rising, and I may start getting emotional, start crying on this video because the movie was just like so moving and so powerful, and just the best representation of the resilience of the theater community and the Broadway community. But I don't even know really where to begin. Okay, so this is a first for a lot of reasons. I've never reviewed a documentary before. Because a documentary is like about real events and real people, I'm a little bit, nervous about doing it. But it's even more both exciting and I have a lot of trepidation about it because I know one of the documentary subjects. So I'm wearing my hat today because I just got back from a trip to New York where I got to see the premiere of a film called Broadway Rising at the Tribeca Film Festival. And it's a documentary about how Broadway was affected by the shutdown, by the pandemic, because this was, the first time that Broadway was shut down for that lengthy period of time. And it was shut down for almost like 18 months, just completely unprecedented. Even during 9/11, it didn't get shut down for that long. It was the kind of shutdown that we really didn't know if we're going to come back from it, because Broadway itself is such a machine and a business, and there's so many cogs that go into making that work, which means that there's so much to take into account when you're trying to bring it back, trying to resurrect it. And what I loved about this documentary was, in addition to just kind of like chronicling Broadway as a whole and sort of the stages it went through with the shutdown and with the reopening, it actually specifically followed a few subjects from various parts of the Broadway community. Actors, ushers, producers, some of the costumers, dancers, and the best stage doorman, Ernie Paler, who made this hat. And he's just like the sweetest guy, and you would have no idea how much he went through to be able to come back to work, to be able to come out on the other side of it and still be this really optimistic, wonderful person. And I know that he really values his work and the people that he works with, and that was something that really kept him going when a lot of people would have just kind of given up and had a pity party and been like, why me? Anyway, I don't want to only talk about Ernie, because there were other people involved in this movie. One of my favorite stories within this documentary was there was a dancer, and he had already been kind of feeling like maybe he was done with his decades of Broadway run because he was experiencing injuries and things, and he was kind of becoming disillusioned with it already. And then he got COVID, and he had the version of COVID that was like towards the very beginning of the pandemic, when we really didn't know anything about it and how to treat it and like how severe it could be. And he experienced breathing problems to the point where he really had to like intentionally remind himself to breathe, which is a really scary thing for anybody, but particularly people who make their living performing on stage. Your breath support is your instrument. And when it's something that's so innate and it's taken away from you, that is just like terrifying. So he got COVID and sort of was coping with this new reality of worrying about when he's going to get his next breath. I'll start by saying this doesn't have a depressing ending to it, because one of the ways that the Broadway community kind of came together and found a way to still be able to embrace and explore their art. People came up with different solutions for this. One that this dancer got involved with was a floral shop that was actually started by another person from Broadway who was out of work and wanted to find a way to continue to make money and continue to pursue like a creative part of the craft. So it was actually like the entire company was like comprised of Broadway people who were out of work. So it was a great way to give people work. It just made me smile so much to watch how much joy this new artistic endeavor gave him, to the point where when Broadway did reopen, he kind of decided that he might be done with Broadway, and he's actually getting a lot of joy and purpose out of doing these floral arrangements. He found a newfound way of expressing himself and expressing his creativity, and I just loved that. I thought that was something that was just kind of an unexpected highlight. You go into the film maybe thinking that it's all about the journey back to Broadway, and for most of the people it is. But there were a few that took this time to find a new passion, to really think about, like, how much longer do I want to be doing this? Is this really what I want to do, or is there something else out there for me? And I loved it that they included his story, because I think that was definitely a reality for a lot of people, was that they either couldn't come back to performing for whatever reason, or they found a new passion, a new dream. And yeah, I just love that story. The other thing I love about that story, though, was there was this great little full circle moment with one of the other people who was being followed, one of the other subjects, an actress who played Glinda in Wicked. And we followed her journey from, like, the show being shut down, Broadway being shut down, and she took the time to become more family involved, but she also wanted to still, like, be able to tap into the artistry. And she and one of the people that played Elphaba opposite her in Wicked started doing classes for people to, like, Zoom in and do, like, voice lessons and stuff. And so they found a new passion for, like, education that way, which was cool, which is another way to just, like, share your talent and, you know, help train the next generation. And I thought that was really wonderful that they found that thing. But anyway, her story ended with Broadway reopening. She came back to be Glinda, and they did this whole thing about, like, you know, having to kind of retrain your voice and get back into shape. And Glinda, her first line in Wicked is, "It's good to see me, isn't it?" And it's just, like, the perfect line to reopen Broadway with. And I remember seeing, like, YouTube videos of that moment when it happened, and just, you know, almost like tearing up, because it was such a just the absolute quintessential perfect opening line for that moment. But what was cool was that night she received a floral arrangement, and it was from this guy who'd been working with his floral company. We got to see him creating this floral arrangement, then we got to see him bring it and put it in her dressing room, and then we saw her later reading the little card on it. So it's this great little, just, like, combining the two stories into one, bringing both worlds together, sort of sweet moment. She had a kid during the pandemic. I think a lot of people found themselves having the time to devote time to family, and that was definitely a theme in this particular movie. It was a lot about getting to spend time with your loved ones. There was a couple who had a costume shop. They had adopted several children, and we really got to see a lot of footage of them with all of their kids, and just how adorable their family was. That storyline was really fascinating to me, because costumes are an aspect of Broadway I'm not as privy to. So I'm always fascinated to hear what that sort of, you know, work life is like. And I, in addition to just, like, the sheer talent that these people have to create these wonderful outfits and characters through clothing, one thing I had not thought about was when Broadway did reopen, it was all kind of at once. So there were several scenes within this documentary about that time period of like how harried everybody involved with the costuming was to try to get, they were getting like multiple orders coming in because everybody was opening simultaneously, and they had to kind of like ask for a little bit more time than what they were going to be able to be given, because they were just like, we cannot meet this quota, this requirement, because like we're still getting used to like the pace of what it's like when Broadway is reopened, because they'd spent so much time finding a way to continue to do costume repair and things like that. But like once Broadway reopened, it was like everything was an instant rush to get everything back to the way it was. And I think that's honestly like, I think it's a bit of a lesson that Broadway learned and maybe still needs to learn, which is the instant gratification of trying to just like put things back the way they were. It doesn't always work, and it unfortunately leads to earlier closures of shows that if they'd been given a little bit more time to kind of get their bearings before reopening, and not just the shows, but like Broadway in general, kind of figuring out how to be open during a pandemic and enforce masks and vaccination and all that kind of stuff, so that we're not having outbreaks of COVID within the Broadway community. And of course, I am speaking about the early closure of Jagged Little Pill, which is still so hard to think about. But I want to talk about the title a little bit, because in addition to Broadway Rising talking about literally Broadway like reopening, I think it's also about Broadway rising to the occasion and rising to its potential for what it could be. There definitely was an ongoing theme within the movie about this time during the pandemic being a time to have a bit of a reckoning and think about how we can use this as a reset so that when Broadway reopens, it's a better Broadway. It's a more diverse Broadway. You know, there's still a lot of improvements to be made in terms of like queer representation, racial inequality and equity. One of the things that I think the pandemic gave so many people was access. People who cannot come to New York, whether it's because they can't afford to come to New York or they are somehow immunocompromised, they can't travel. There's just so much that virtual entertainment was able to give to people during the pandemic. The way that Broadway and other industries made their entertainment available to people through streaming platforms allowed so many more people to be able to see these amazing shows and performances and artists, you know, share their work with a wider audience. And I think that's something that Broadway is still working on, accessibility, because I do think that theater has an incredible power to, change the world, honestly, to change hearts and minds, but particularly to help people feel seen and help them feel heard and help their stories be told. And I think this year there's several examples of shows that maybe like a decade ago couldn't have been on Broadway because Broadway wasn't as open to diverse storytelling as it is right now. There's still a ways to go with it, but I think about like the success of like A Strange Loop, and I will not just like gush about A Strange Loop on here for too long, but as a writer who maybe one day wants to find a way to like tell my story, I'm so inspired by Michael R. Jackson's persistence and authenticity and the amount of time and effort that he put into that show to really get to tell his story his way and open up the Broadway community to, Black queer stories can be really impactful and funny and emotional, and we need more of them, and we need more characters like Usher out there getting to just unabashedly be themselves. So I was so happy not only that musical like won Best Musical. That was incredible because, sorry, I know I'm just talking about Strange Loop now, but the number of people on stage for that show, the number of people that it took to get that show made, the number of people who believed in the magic of that show, so wonderful to see everybody up on that stage at the end. The Tonys were great this year. But in particular, the fact that Michael R. Jackson won for the book was, very encouraging to all writers out there who want to tell their stories. There's still so much that Broadway needs to work on in terms of representation, but at the very least, I feel like the pandemic gave people a time to just like sit with this notion of, what do I want to see more of? How do we make that happen? And not just, let's hire the right actors to play the characters so that we see them on stage. It's even more about getting people in the writers' rooms, having people behind the scenes who are creating the stories, creating the costumes, creating these things so that they're infusing their own authentic experience into the art. So that it's not just like, on the surface we're doing the right thing. It starts behind the scenes in all of those aspects. And so I'm glad that this film in particular showcased a lot of the behind the scenes people. And I am going to talk about Ernie for a little bit, because as a fan of Jagged Little Pill, there were definitely portions of this film that resonated more with me whenever they would show Ernie with the cast, whether it was like behind the scenes or when they recorded a video when Ernie was in the hospital so that he knew that they were thinking of him. And this whole cast is just, they're just so sweet. They showed a recording of the day that Ernie went back to work. And he had been doing all kinds of like physical therapy and everything in preparation so that he would be able to get back to work. And you've kind of seen him go through this journey. And one consequent side effect of him being out of work was that he was at home so much, so that his dog, Sweet Pea, who she is now also a movie star because of this movie, she was so used to him being there, and they had kind of their rhythm, that the day that he went back to work, we saw the footage of him leaving the house, and Sweet Pea was so... She was like whining and just like so upset that he was leaving, and just like didn't understand where he was going and why he was leaving her. And it was honestly almost like cruel to watch, to hear her whines as he was leaving. But I think that that's something that so many people can relate to. I think that in addition to what I was talking about with like getting to spend more time with your family and like kids getting used to their parents being around the house, and so it must have been really hard when the world kind of like reopened and parents went back to work, and kids who had been so used to having their parents right there now were like separated from them. I think it's the same thing with pets. Pets just got to have so much more time with their humans. And when the world, reset and normalcy resumed, it meant that the humans would leave again and wouldn't be around all the time. So I think it was a hard scene to watch, but I also think it was a very real and relatable scene that a lot of people will resonate with. But then, of course, they also, they showed Ernie showing up at the theater, and there was this little welcome party of several of the cast members from Jagged. They were all, of course, just like so happy to see him, and he was so overcome with emotion that he couldn't even really get the words out to tell them like how happy he was to be back, how much they meant to him, how important it was for him to come back and be there with them and be doing this job that he loved. As a fan of Jagged, as a fan of Ernie, it was a really emotional scene to watch, but also just so touching and just authentic to who he is as a person. And something that I've heard Ernie talk about, and he talked about both in the documentary and in the panel, is that like he's been really kind of overwhelmed by the support from the Broadway community for him. He's very humble in the way that he talks about the fact that he's just the stage door guy. Every job matters, and you never know the impact that you can have on somebody, because Ernie may see himself as a security guy or a stage door guy, but the way I see that is, and it's something that I have witnessed myself, Like, he's the first face that people see when they're coming into the stage door to go into the show to perform. So his state of being heavily influences how other people enter their workday. They could be having a horrible day, and he's standing there and he gives them a smile, he gives them a hug, and, you know, welcomes them into work. It can just completely shift and brighten your day. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, but like, he genuinely loves and cares about the people that he works with. He's so surprised by, you know, the idea that like these Tony winners think of him as a friend. I just have to like keep reminding him that he's awesome. And I really have always been a theater buff, but it wasn't something that I actively participated in. Part of it is because I am not an actor. It's not something that is an innate ability that I possess. I much prefer to watch other people do it and be great at it. But something I've always noticed about theater is it's a very galvanizing and welcoming community. It's a very emboldening community, even when you yourself maybe don't feel like you are worthy. Everybody is so, community is the best word that I can think of to use when talking about theater, because it really does feel like a community. It feels like a family in a lot of ways. And I think it's partly because of the structure, and especially Broadway. You know, you got like 8 shows a week. You're with these people all the time. And it's not just the cast. It's the ushers, it's the stage doorman, it's the COVID officers. Like, everybody involved is so, everybody is welcome and everybody's role is prized. I think in a lot of ways this documentary is, it's a niche subject that not everybody is as aware of or places as much stock in. But one thing that I definitely noticed at the premiere, I've been a movie fan all of my life. I've been a fan of movies and TV shows, and that's sort of where my brain goes in terms of thinking about media and wanting to discuss and unpack aspects of media. I go to film and TV. But ever since discovering Jagged Little Pill and becoming more aware of the theater community and getting a chance to not only see Jagged Little Pill a couple times and following the trajectory of the careers of the people who are involved with Jagged and seeing what else they've done and getting to know more plays and more music and things that way, I've also kind of branched out and like really been intentional about attending other forms of theater on Broadway, but also just locally. There's something about theater artists that feels more real and human and approachable and accessible than, say, a Hollywood actor. And it's been an interesting thing to witness, the humanity and the vulnerability that exists within that. There's something that is so powerful about watching a stage performance, seeing someone just fully envelop themselves in a character live before you. Theater is just amazing. And I love that this film showed so many facets to what makes theater amazing. Because it's not just about the performance. There's so much going on behind the scenes that you don't even know. There's so many people involved that to bring that to you. Jesse Tyler Ferguson is one of the producers on this film, and he introed the film kind of talking about the fact that this film was like something that everybody was so passionate about. It was very much a passion project, but it was also like a little bit of a lifeline for people because it was something to work on when they didn't have work. And the idea that like this film was getting made kind of gave everybody the hope that Broadway would reopen. That was like the purpose of this film, was to like track the progress until Broadway reopened. So it kind of gave everybody this like goal to shoot for. And it was great because like Jesse Tyler Ferguson is up on stage And this is the day after the Tonys. So he's literally just won the Tony for Take Me Out. At first, when you're seeing Jesse Tyler Ferguson before you, you're like, oh my gosh, this, TV star just won a Tony, all this kind of stuff. But the more he talks and the longer that you're there with him, that whole facade of fame and Hollywood and everything just kind of goes away, because you feel like everybody in this space, we're all these theater buffs who are just so excited about Broadway. And even though he name dropped Bernadette Peters, the knee-jerk reaction of being like, why is Bernadette Peters here for this documentary opening? But it's a reminder that Bernadette Peters, more than anybody else, understands. I don't even really know if I have the words to talk about it, because it's something I'm still processing, but like, she's both this amazing, talented, unreachable person, but she's also just a theater goer and a lover of theater. I felt like we were all just like fans watching Broadway be celebrated on screen. It's not like pick out all the famous people who are here. They're not here because they're famous. They're here because they appreciate what this film is, because they understand more than anybody what the Broadway community is, and that it's not meant to be this elite Hollywood whatever. I feel so fortunate to have kind of come to that understanding about the difference between theater and the film industry. Isn't that just so cool, though? Bernadette Peters is in that room. That's crazy. Jesse Tyler Ferguson is up on stage the day after getting his Tony, and he is so enthusiastic about this film. The panel that happened after the film with several of the subjects from the film, they also got to kind of elaborate on, the ways that they think that Broadway has improved and how they can continue to improve. And there were a lot of great moments in that panel alone. And that's what's so cool about the documentary, because it's literally these people who are sitting at the panel. This is also the real them in the documentary. They're not like playing characters. It's just like a continuation of like, this was when we shot the film and this is where we're at now. So as a fan of theater and of Broadway, it was just all around a really inspiring evening of celebrating the power of theater and all of the people that make it what it is. And then afterward, Megan Twohey, who was one of the subjects who was followed in it, who's a musician who worked on Waitress, I think was the most recent, sang a song that she wrote in the wake of Nick Cordero passing. And the song was mentioned in the film, and there was a little bit that was played, but then she actually like sang it live after the film, which was incredibly special. And then that was followed up by the Glinda and Elphaba, who had been featured in the film, singing For Good. Like, as soon as they announced that they were coming up, I was like, if they sing For Good... I was like, I've already cried like 3 times watching this movie. I don't know if I can handle a performance of For Good. And it was incredible. And then they did the panel. So it was cool because like the movie itself had all these things going on, but then they had, I think because it was the premiere, they also had these other extra little bonus things that tied into the film, which was just... Every time I've experienced something to do with theater, this year in particular, with all of the coming back after COVID, well, not after COVID. COVID is still happening, by the way. This says post-COVID, but that just means like post the brunt of COVID. Almost every time I've been in a theater, there's this energy. It's like buzzing as everybody gears up for the show to start. Like, we're all in this space together, and it's this communal experience that is like no other. And that's one of the reasons I've like sought out more theater in my life, because there's just something about being in that room with other people. And I get that a little bit in movie theater as well, but there's something different about live entertainment. But even this kind of movie where you're kind of like combining the two, where it is a movie but it's about live entertainment, I assume the people watching this are going to be people who are also theater buffs, because this is about a documentary about Broadway. So if you're watching this, that's probably your niche. You know what I'm talking about. You know what that energy is like before a show starts. And even after the show, like after you've experienced it and you're just sort of like trying to process everything that just happened. It's one of the best feelings in the world. And it's the kind of feeling that I want like everybody to get to experience, which is why I want it to be more accessible to people. This is why I create videos like this, so that if you haven't had a chance to see a show or something, you can kind of like live vicariously through my breakdown of it. As much as I like talking about it, and as much as I hope that me talking about it gives you the experience of it, obviously watching the film would be more ideal. So I do hope that there's more access to it so more people can see it, because I just think it's, for any theater fan out there, especially a theater fan who was trying to maintain their fandom during the pandemic and getting every bit of theater they could when it was closed and worried about if it would reopen, I think it's the kind of film they need to see. Hopefully it'll be on a streaming platform like HBO Max or something so that people can watch it. Because I don't know that it's going to get like a theatrical release. Documentaries in general don't tend to be as widely released, unfortunately. They are looking at distribution, and hopefully will be on a streamer. And so when that happens, I will update the description here, so I'll have a link to that or more information about that once I know more, once that's been confirmed, so that people can go watch it. I feel like there's no way for me to possibly cover the entire movie because it's so layered with so many different stories. I think I'll leave it there. I guess if you like this video, you can check out the first like 4 videos that I put on here. They're about Jack and Little Pill because those are very specifically about theater. So I recommend those to you, especially the second one that I posted, where I talked about Ernie and I talked about how I got this hat, and you can get a little bit of reference point on that. Yeah, but if you like this video and you want to hit that little thumbs up, that'd be cool. If you really like this video and you want to see other videos that I post on here, initially the plan was for this to be film and TV reviews. And I do think that there's going to be plenty of that on here, but there's so much to talk about with theater that there probably will be other theater reviews on here as well. So if that's what you're into, I can pretty confidently say there will be more theater reviews. Anyway, there's a little subscribe button, and you can click that. You'll become one of my subscribers, and you'll get notifications of when I post new videos. So if you get a chance to see Broadway Rising, I definitely recommend it. I think it'll make you feel a lot of feels, but in a really good way. I think that it's a very cathartic viewing experience, especially because it really does have a happy ending, because Broadway did reopen, and even though we're still not quite back to where we were or where we could be, I say we as though I'm part of the Broadway community, but you know what? I am part of the Broadway community because I am a fan, and that is a huge part of it. And that was something that was also relayed by several of the subjects, especially Ernie. He has a lot of love for the fans, and we love him for it. He has such a big heart and a wonderful soul. It's such an emboldening person to be around and to talk to. And oh my gosh, he's got so many great stories. Also, I will plug this hat made by Ernie. It's his company, Marican Unlimited. So I'm going to give that a plug one more time. And he's got a lot of great like Broadway themed merchandise on that site. So if you're into some custom made Broadway merch that you can't get at the little merch table at the theater, highly recommend. It's all really great stuff. And anyway, sorry, I'll stop gushing about Ernie, but he is just wonderful. And I'm so happy that this film is getting to showcase a little bit of him and his family. His wife Maribel is also just a wonderful person, and I'm so happy that the bit of their story is getting to be told. And as part of this wonderful celebration of the Broadway community, yeah, it just makes me really happy to... Sorry, I just keep saying happy and I keep smiling, but it's just, it was an emotional film to watch because of, kind of re-experiencing what it was like when the pandemic first hit and the shutdown first happened. I feel like they really captured what that time was like, and they kept the tone of it very optimistic, that we were working towards something, that it wasn't like, and Broadway will never come back. I think everybody in the film had this firm belief that it would be back, that it wouldn't be gone forever. And that's the feeling I think a lot of people either had or really tried to lean into, because it's too hard to imagine that we'd never see the lights on Broadway again. It's great to watch this film after Broadway has reopened and knowing that Broadway is back and that it didn't go away. Yeah. So, Broadway Rising. Go watch it.